But now I want to have a conversation about Fox News Channel, as we've been doing for a couple of days now. The White House has gone on the warpath and attacked Fox News Channel for not being really news, as you guys know. And Glynis MacNico, if I'm pronouncing that right, and she'll tell me in a second, is going to join us because she wrote in Mediaite.com, why isn't the MSM, mainstream media, complaining about White House attacks on Fox? Glynis, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Did I say your name even vaguely correctly?
I think it sounded like you did. Glynis MacNico.
Oh, McNichol, right, of course.
Yeah.
I saw the L. All right, now, Glynis, I have the answer to your question. Why isn't the mainstream media complaining about White House attacks on Fox? Number one, they are. I've seen 10 different papers saying that this is not the right path. David Korn, who's a liberal writer, John Nichols, who's a liberal writer, have agreed. MSNBC and CNN have done 5-minute segments saying how the White House is wrong to attack Fox News Channel. One, do you recognize that a lot of outlets have agreed with Fox, including Jake Tapper of ABC News Today?
Well, I think that post went up early yesterday morning, and in the interim, specifically with Jake Tapper, sort of the conversation has changed. Tapper went into the White House briefing and made quite a big deal about it with Robert Gibbs, which got picked up in a lot of venues. I think the point I was trying to make was the White House trying to delegitimize a major news operation, whether or not you agree with some of its opinion hosts, is a worrisome move. And had this happened during the Bush administration, I think the outcry would have been uproarious. And the outcry over the administration making this decision towards Fox has been slightly more muted. Now, I think there is a backlash sort of quietly in the works against the White House decision to do this, but I don't think the reaction was as immediate as it might have been had it been another news operation or another government.
Okay. Now, I disagree in about 3 ways at least. So let's have fun and have that discussion. Number one, you keep referring to Fox News as a news organization, and I agree completely with the White House. It is not a news organization, and that's the problem. Now, and by news, I mean straight news, where they try to cover things as they are, roughly speaking. And I know that I'm not expecting perfection here. Some bias creeps in here and there. But take what they did with the 9/12 protests and the gay rights protests. Very similar numbers in the number of protests. They're both in Washington, D.C. They're both in the span of about a month. For the 9/12 protests, the teabag protests, they went nuts. They covered it. They literally had a producer cheerleading on the sidelines, telling the crowd when to cheer. For the gay rights protests, they didn't send a single camera crew. Do you think this is a news organization?
I do think in the larger sense, Fox News is a news organization. I'm certainly not going to defend certain decisions they've made and the 9/12.
Certain decisions?
Yes, I don't think it's fair to damn an entire news organization. There are real journalists employed by Fox.
Name them.
I'm sorry?
Name them. Maybe Shep Smith?
I would absolutely argue Shep Smith. I would also argue Major Garrett. I would argue a number of their sort of lesser-known reporters that are sent out into the field. I do think that
Glynis, look, did they hire some people that worked in the field of television journalism before? Yes, they did. Now, whether that's actual journalism is a whole separate conversation, all right? So they hire some of these news actors that have acted on other stations before, but then it's not that question. The question is, what do they tell them to do? Dan Moody, who is the vice president of news at Fox News Channel, wrote a memo, for example, after the 2006 elections, asking his reporters to find news of Iraqi insurgents celebrating Democratic victories. Does that sound like a news organization?
I think we're having maybe 2 different conversations here. I am certainly not suggesting that in certain instances, and in maybe frequent instances, but the larger point here is, do we want a government that is attacking a large media operation that obviously is enjoyed by many people in the country, as you can see by the ratings they get on certain shows? I think that is
all right. So that's point number 2. And on that, I also disagree. Do I want them attacking Fox News? Hell yeah. Now, I'll tell you why. Because if you don't answer the call, and now they send one swift boat issue after another. Death panels, Acorn, et cetera, et cetera. You know the list. The list goes on while they're pretending to do news. If you don't answer that, then you're going to get swift-boated just like John Kerry did. And you don't know a thing about politics. When somebody punches you in the mouth, you punch them back.
Whose responsibility is this right now? Because the ratings that Fox News is enjoying is not an accident, and they're not enjoying those ratings because of the White House's lack of response. They're enjoying those ratings because they've touched a nerve. Now, that is not the White House's responsibility. We don't live in a nanny state here. There are plenty of news sources out there should the public choose to go and find different ones.
Yeah, look, again, they're not news. I mean, seriously, Glynis, let's go back to that for one quick second, then I really want to talk about point number 2. But do you really, when you turn on Fox News, do you think that they're just happen to be covering the story of the day? And look at that, they think the story of the day is, again, Acorn. Really, among all the things that are going on in the world, the biggest news story that their news anchors are talking about is over and over again Acorn. Are you under the impression that that's really what they think is, hey, as journalists, we think this is the biggest news story of the day? Or do you think maybe Roger Ailes, who ran Nixon's campaign and Bush's campaign, is actually pushing them to cover Republican propaganda to hurt the president?
I think it's probably a mix of both. I do think I think we're arguing smaller points here, but to say the entire organization it has no news validity whatsoever is, I think, untrue.
All right, now, and I'm glad you made that point because I make that distinction, right? And we're talking to Glynis McNichol from Mediaite. She's a senior editor at Mediaite.com. And we really appreciate you coming on to have this discussion because I think it's an important one. Look, I don't have a problem with the partisan press. It's not like I think, Glynis, hey, you know what, they should shut down Fox News. That's crazy talk. And you're right, they do address a large audience, larger audience than the other cable stations, right? And they come in number 3 overall for all the cable stations. And Glenn Beck gets 2 to 3 million viewers a night. That's a lot of viewers, right? So I don't have a problem with the National Review doing conservative perspective, right? I don't have a problem with Fox News Channel doing conservative perspective. The problem I have, Glynis, is that they're liars because they pretend that they're doing fair and balanced journalism, which they're not. If they came out and said, hey, look, obviously we look at the news from a conservative perspective, including our so-called news programs, then I say, oh, have at it, Hoss. And then Obama should go on and debate their conservative point of view. There's no problem with that. But the problem isn't what they're doing. The problem is how they lie about it.
Now, the problem here is that do you want the government to be deciding for us what is news and what is not news? If Fox News is lying about what's out there and giving some stories too much coverage to unfairly balance them, then I would argue that it's the responsibility of other news organizations to be vetting Fox's stories. It's not the responsibility of our government to be telling us what is appropriate news.
Glynis, there's a very important distinction there. The White House isn't saying, I'm going to tell you what's acceptable and not acceptable. And
they are saying
no,
that.
hold on. If I don't find Fox News acceptable, then I'm going to shut them down. That's Hugo Chavez. Yes, of course, that's not. I would never be on that side. I don't want them shutting down the National Review. I don't want them shutting down Fox News Channel. No one ever made that claim. No, all they're saying is, that dude punched me in the mouth, and I'm going to punch him back. Okay? And if you're a politician and you don't do that, you're an idiot.
There's a difference between being a politician and being the President of the United States. And he wields a lot of power. And when Robert Gibbs says, what I am saying is we don't like shows at 5 and 9, and yes, there's no valid news on the entire channel, which is what he told Jake Tapper, then that comes very close to the White House deciding what is appropriate news for the country and what isn't. And
no, it's not. They're not taking away their license. They're just saying we don't like it because all they ever do is attack us. That's perfectly
not
fair.
Taking away their license, but they are pushing back as hard and harder than
God
I think
bless
is appropriate. And I would argue that I would rather keep the White House out of our news cycle and put up with whatever we put up with from Fox News than have the White House interfere in
how are they interfering? How are they interfering? They're saying, look. They're not interfering. They're saying, look, these guys make up crap day after day. Here's crap 1, crap 2, crap 3, okay? And I'm just telling you that they made it up. What do you want them to do? Be quiet and say, oh, no, okay, Fox News is right. No, of course, they're going to say, look, what you just made up about Acorn is 100% untrue. I literally don't know what you want them to do.
there's a difference between then arguing a story and one reporter or one show. I have no qualms with them pushing back to Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck is, making up and exaggerating things left and right. That's a different. There's a difference between that and them addressing the entire network, which is what they're doing.
All right, now that gets us to point number 3, our final point. And I appreciate your patience, Glynis. And we're talking to Glynis McNichol. She's the senior editor at Mediaite.com, okay? So now the final point is, look, if Fox News was partisan press and everybody recognized it as such, you have Air America, you have Fox News, and you take it with a grain of salt. As I've said a number of times, I'm totally okay with that. And then everybody's on the level and we get it, right? The problem isn't just that the White House, politicians didn't recognize that they weren't on the level, that people treated them as if they were doing real journalism. The problem is other media outlets treat them as if they're real news. So when Fox News, quote unquote, breaks a story, they go, oh my God, Fox News. A perfect example of that. In 2000, they hired George Bush's cousin to call the election. He calls the election first. The other news channels panic because Fox News called the election, and they call it right away for George Bush, and that just, all it does is change history. Now, can you not see how the rest of the so-called real journalists should not be paying attention to what the fake journalists at Fox News are doing?
I'm not going to argue that point one bit. I fully agree that it is the responsibility of the rest of the journalists out there to be vetting what is going on at Fox, and in particular be vetting what Glenn Beck has been preaching for the last 2 months. I absolutely agree with that. But that's a big difference between the expectation that the other cable channels and journalists will go after Fox and that the White House should be going after Fox. There's a huge difference between those two assertions.
Okay, I want to make another distinction here. The funny part is, when they go after Beck and O'Reilly, I actually don't like that part as much. I have no problem with Beck and O'Reilly because Fox admits that they're opinion hosts. Then, okay, they're allowed to have their opinion. It's a free country. My problem is with their news division that doesn't do news. It does propaganda, and it tricks other organizations into following along. And finally, that's why the White House bringing this up is so smart, because it gets CNN and ABC and all those places for the first time to ask, oh, golly gee willikers, should we be following Fox News' lead, or should we realize that perhaps they have an agenda and that when they do a story, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a news story?
I think it's a pathetic state of affairs if it requires the White House to be behaving in this manner to wake up the rest of the industry. And you know what? The rest of the media industry may be listening to Fox more than they should because Fox ratings are the envy of the industry. They're making money hand over fist, and they have a lot of popular hosts. So these are all concerns, absolutely.
So that goes back to my point about how they're not really doing news on television anyway. I mean, they're trying to figure out what's the most entertaining way to get ratings. Oh, my God, Fox does it in a conservative way. Let's follow. So, but that's a whole separate conversation.
Whose responsibility is it to change that? I really would prefer the government stay out of the free press.
I got to say it one last time. They're not telling people that they're going to shut anything down or take away their license. The government is not, quote unquote, interfering. It is some people. It's an administration that's being attacked that is just simply, in words, answering that attack. If they didn't do that, they would be incompetent, in my opinion.
I think we disagree on their response, on the definition of their response.
There's no question we disagree on that. But Glynis, you've been great. We really appreciate you coming on. Everybody check out Glynis McNichol at Mediaite.com. Thanks again for coming on the Young Turks.
Thank you so much.
All right. Young Turks.